Welcome back. We are talking about our latest episode. This is going to be episode 4, right? I think we're doing episode 4 for the podcast for season 22. Um, Still a little crazy in my mind that like this has been going on that long. This episode, I think we want to talk about, well, this is where, and I'll bring it up in the podcast as well. We got a request from Timothy in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and he said, "Hey, why can't you guys talk a little bit about the situations that we all run into where I'm going to try to do it in a nicer language a little bit, but it's like where we have disagreements with people that are maybe our boss, maybe a customer, maybe it's coworkers. And particularly if it's like a design or foundational issue or something like that, is like, how do we work with that? And how do we, particularly if we are really convinced that they're taking the wrong direction, what do we do and how do we handle it? So I think that would be a fun. I'm thinking other F words too, but a fun little thing that topic we can do for this episode. And I think you're on board with it. You have anything you wanted to add to it, or does that sound like a good way to go?
Yeah, so the way you kind of described that, I kind of like that, and especially thinking of the developer journey. For those of you coming out of like boot camps, out of college, out of self-taught, you have been or learning a certain way of doing things a certain way for a while now. Now, when you get into a career or get into a more professional environment, especially with larger coding shops with lots of developers, you're going to run into a lot of times where you butt heads or an organization does things one way that you have never seen before. So now you've got to jump in and figure out how to do that. Even if it's not necessarily the right way, it is the way that basically you're being told to do it. And just before we jump in, it reminds me of that book Liftoff, where Elon Musk went through launching SpaceX. They were quick to get things done, like quick to innovate, that startup mentality. But then once the company was established, they started having to implement all these policies and procedures for safety, and basically they became NASA. So you went from this very fast-paced, growing, learning, developing to, oh, I now meet organizations. It's now time to grow up, and now I get kind of put into this box.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there too, and sometimes it's about the why. So, hello and welcome back. We are continuing our season talking this episode about the developer journey. We are sort of working through various things and maybe milestones that you're going to get along the way with your developer journey. Some of them you only see early, some you only see late, some you see recurring throughout your career. That may be what we have this time, because we're going to talk about like butting heads. When are we, when we get in situations when we are not really all on board, where we have like a way we want to go or a way that we're taught, and others with us, boss, maybe customer, stuff like that, are going a different direction, and dealing with that and making sure that we are, doing what we need to do, that what we're paid to do as well. It's like, to make sure that we're getting the job done, but also that we are, if we need to raise flags up, the warning, then we're raising those flags up. I will go ahead and introduce myself first. I'm Rob Broadhead. I'm one of the founders of Developreneur.com. Developreneur, building better developers, this podcast, this YouTube channel. If you're not, whichever one you're not watching, go ahead and try the other one just because. But on the other side, there are no red flags over there, even though he does have a red background. Michael, can you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Michael Malash. I'm one of the co-founders of Developreneur and founder of Envision QA, where we help small and mid-sized businesses with code assessments, software assessments, and building custom software.
So I want to start with, this actually is like a recent story, and it is one of the things that I think we see most often where we struggle, and that is early in our career, because we usually have come out of either a certain school or boot camp, or maybe there's one company that we worked with, and there's a style, there is a culture, there's a way that they get things done, and there's also processes and procedures that we were taught that this is, basically we're taught that this is the correct way to do software, to build software, to solve problems. It may be that that is the correct way, but it may also be, which most often it is, there are other ways as well. There's not just one way to solve this problem. There's many, many, many different ways. Once you get out into we'll call it the real world, you can bump into those pretty darn quickly. Now, we will have things we're comfortable with. There are things that will, mark us or be trademarks of us because of where we came from. If you think of like big schools and stuff like that, where it's like, yeah, people are from this school are almost always like this, or they have this style, or they go into this business. It's something that was personal recently that actually reminded me of a past thing. Was I play this thing called handball, similar short thing, similar to racquetball minus a racket. I hadn't played in a long, long time. And there's a guy that I knew, I mean, like 20 years, guy that I knew, and he didn't recognize me. I recognized him a little bit. He didn't recognize me until I started to play. And then he recognized the style. And it was funny that he mentioned, because I had a coach that worked with me a bit. And then the people that were in my early years that taught me a lot and I played with a lot all had that style. There is just an approach, a style, a way that all of us play. And so it is, to me, I could always pick somebody out of a crowd of handball players that was doing that because I knew that I recognized that style. Similarly, my one son played hockey, and there was one time I was watching him skate early on when he was younger, and he skated very different from his brothers. And even though I had coached him and I'd coached them, I recognized another coach he'd had that was a very good coach, that was a very good skater, how his style, my son's style, mimicked to some extent that coach's style. And it was because it's like you're taught, even in these kind of things, even like football, there is different, you can, especially going to the college, there are, and actually even pros, there are head coach approaches to offense, to defense, and stuff like that. If you're talking about football, we have the same thing as developers. It does not mean it's like in football, you could have a running game, you could have a passing game, you may be one of the others, and they can all work. That's the same thing we run into. The first thing I want to say is that Michael mentioned, like, if you go in somewhere and they say, this is the way we do it, that is the right way to do it. Regardless of what your background is, if there are developer standards and processes and procedures, that is how you need to do it. If there's a problem with it, if it's clunky or time consuming or you don't understand it or whatever, feel free, like, ask questions. But one, you may get an answer of, hey, that's how we do it. And you may just have to suck it up and just do it that way. More likely, well, not more likely, sometimes you'll get, this is why we do it. And Michael touched on this a little bit, is like, sometimes you are a big enough organization now that, yeah, if you're just yourself doing development, you can do this stuff. You can have this approach all day long. But when you grow into a team of, let's say, 500 developers, and you're building stuff that has got mission critical software for different people, it's going to be different. There's a big difference between you building a little app on your machine and you update it right away versus this is something that's got 4 million users and you just update it because you want to do a hot fix on production. There are levels of concern. I don't want to digress too much from the personal, like, headbutting conflicts, because sometimes we run into that where it's just like, it's not that clear, where it's like, we've got this thing to do and we really don't like their approach. Michael and I think we worked for a guy that there's like, it seemed like regularly something would come up that almost he did it just to tick us off. He would just like be, no, we need to do it this way, and would not explain it, or very rarely. So it was just sort of like, okay, I guess we got to do it this way. And then we would go grumble, but we would go do it, or, some extent. And that's really not the approach. Just don't do what we did. The better approach is to, as much as possible, try to understand. Come at it as, okay, this is the way you do it. I want to make sure I'm clear on how it is, because really it's going to be better, almost with the goal of you being able to defend that way of doing it, so that you understand it enough to say that, hey, they do it this way, and this is why, because that's going to help you do it better, understand it, and make sure that you are addressing the spirit of the law as well as the letter of the law for whatever that process is, but also because at some point you're going to grow, you're going to have other developers you're going to interact with, and they're going to ask questions. And you may be able to, it may be viable to just say, hey, can you go talk to Michael? He knows, he'll help you out with that. But it's more helpful, I think, for you and for them to be able to say, oh, this is what I was taught. This is why they do it. This is the reason why. And it is not like drinking the Kool-Aid or anything like that, especially not in this case, because it is you saying, hey, you guys have a different approach. I see where it has value. And this, believe it or not, is how we become better developers. This is the same thing as like somebody that only knows C sharp. And like, well, you got to use C sharp for everything. It's like, no, there are actually other languages out there. You could use Java to do that, or Python, or you could use, I don't know, Ruby, or you name it. It is us expanding our tool chest. So when you have these head-butting moments, I would recommend that instead of butting heads, embrace it as an opportunity to learn, to say, okay, where does this come from? And you can even say, hey, I don't see the value in this. I see where I'm spending too much time on this thing or that thing. Help me understand. It's like, where is your focus? Because their focus may be very different. They may not give a rip what your time is that you're spending on it, because the result is more valuable than the time spent. Now, again, I do a great job getting on my little soapbox. So I'm going to get off my soapbox for a second and throw this over to you, Michael, because I know you've got a lot of things churning in your head about this, and it's very near and dear to your heart as well.
Yeah, so I run into butting heads just about every company I work at, because like you, we tend to like looking for multiple solutions to a problem. Like you said, you could do something in C sharp all the time, but that's not necessarily the only tool out there. You can do Java, you can do Python. So we always look for the best tools. Now, within organizations, though, they've already done that. Or if you're working for a more mature company, they've already gone through the trenches. They've gone through the lessons learned of figuring out how to get to where they are, this more established app product. And you're coming into their shop. So you're coming into a shop that's more established. They kind of have some ground rules, and they have some coding styles, or hopefully they have some coding styles. And so when you come in, if you're unfamiliar with the environment, hopefully they have gone through the process of putting together some software development styles, some coding styles, best practices, and hopefully they have documentation. Now, saying that, I know that in almost every organization I go into, I'm the one that writes that documentation because it doesn't exist. So as I go through, I have to learn how this company does what they do, so that one, I'm doing my job right. Two, I'm not breaking or not following any of the processes that are in place. A lot of times when you come in, you're not going to know. You're going to butt heads with just about everyone. All I can say is, for the first 6 months at a minimum, always ask, all right, here's the problem as I understand it. This is how I'm going to solve it with X. Now, this doesn't quite fit within what you have, so could someone on the team please walk me through how I can put this square peg into this round hole within your policies and procedures? Now, sometimes you can't do that, and that's fine. What you then do is you may have a better solution, so you present that to the team, either through like a collab or like stand up, and walk through your approach to doing it if it doesn't exist already in the organization. Because you will run into that. You'll run into situations where you're not just butting heads, you're butting heads with the software, you're butting heads with the framework, not necessarily people, but the actual code itself. Now, on the flip side of that, I run into this constantly, and I'm not trying to name names, but there are situations where, not just as a developer where we come in with our own, I don't want to say baggage, but our own style, like Rob said, and we have a particular way of doing things. So for instance, I like Java, I like Maven structures, I like doing controllers for backend APIs, but I like taking an additional layer and actually breaking out the controllers on the endpoint hierarchy. So like if you have object A, B, C. So like kind of if you have a path and you have multiple objects, if you define the packages that way, you can go look at your Swagger or your API document and your code mimics it. So it's like quick jump in, figure out where things are. Some organizations don't like that. You have to strictly follow. Oh, it must follow this Maven archetype. You must do this. It has to be this. Fine, do that. But if you don't understand it or you have problems with it, talk to your team, talk to people, ask questions, ask for help. Now, as I say that, there are situations where you have a job to do. You have timelines. We have sprints. We've got deadlines. You have to get your code done in a timely manner. Now, you have to keep in mind, am I doing the minimal amount of work to get the problem done, or am I reinventing the wheel to get this problem out the door? Am I writing 2 lines of code, or am I writing a book because I have this cool fancy framework or this cool way or this plugin to do something that has all this? I throw it in there, and why? If I could do it in 2 lines of code, why did I just write this book? You're going to have to justify that. And that's going to cause friction. Or if you're in the Java world, C# world, and you're keeping up with the latest innovations and the latest versions, you could run across something that's new within the framework, which is a part of the actual language that you use that isn't necessarily new, like it's not necessarily a new item or new style. It's within the tool set you have. The problem is the rest of your team doesn't know about it. So if you start throwing that in, start using it, and don't explain it to anyone, you're going to run into situations where you now have one person on the team that knows how to do this code and no one else can support it. And then you're going to have a lot of friction there because the next person that comes behind it, they're going to be like, what the heck is this? How did they do that? And now they have to spend more time. So basically, you've now scoped create development time with research time on something 2 lines of code versus this cool approach that now may be 1 line of code, but no one has any understanding of what it's doing. So either you need to reset the software design, software style sheet, or have training sessions. So these are things you have to be careful of. Otherwise, you will be butting heads. You will be saying the F word quite a bit, or putting people on mute, walking away, turning your screen off, and just say, I need a minute. Because there's going to be a lot of times where this happens. I would say at least once a day I run into a situation where I run into a line of code trying to, why did they do that? Or why is this missing? On the flip side of that, make sure you do follow those style sheets. Because if you don't, you could be leaving things out. You could be following a different paradigm than the project follows. And now you may have like a domain object structure. You've now completely excluded that. So now it becomes a harder task to maintain that project. So now you come in and it works, but it is not structured in a way that anyone can maintain it. It has to be refactored.
I think that's the thing, is that sometimes, actually a lot of times, I think it comes down to there's not necessarily a right answer. It's just pick one, pick an answer, and take that path. Like development standards, there's a lot of stuff, right? Like, naming standards. There's just gargantuan amounts of documentation on all these various like naming standards and ways you can do it and why you need to do it. And depending on what your background is, and every language, it seems like, has its own little, standard and stuff like that. But it's, at the end of the day, if you're using one that makes sense, that is consistent and works with that environment, do it. There should not be a case where you are part of a group and that you guys and gals are building something and it looks like it was built by a whole bunch of different people. And Michael sort of alluded to this, that adds maintenance cost moving forward. You may not think about it, may not hit you, but somewhere down the line, 6 months from now, you guys have all moved on to different projects and somebody else looks at it. And every time they look at a different method or a different class or a different, it's all over the place. You can't find stuff. You can't assume anything. And sometimes it's like, there's this big complicated thing that's done. It's like, why didn't you use that over there? Now it could be because that didn't exist when you built that big, long thing, but that's where reviews and stuff like that should come in as you're advancing, as you are growing your software. It should be stuff like, hey, we have this new approach. And like say Michael just sort of laid out, there's this new thing, and we can use this. And this is a great new way to leverage the language to solve this problem. One of the things you're probably going to need to do is go back to everywhere else you used the old way and convert it to the new way. So it's like you are adding technical debt, and there should be some sort of refactoring to say, hey, there is a reason for us to upgrade this, and we should do it across the board. If not, then we're going to end up with something. And I see this so many times. It's so frustrating that you can see like what version the code was written on, and you can see who wrote it and where they were at the time. But it's not until after you really understand all the code, you're like, well, this thing was done at this point, but this thing right next to it was done 6 years later, and it's done in a completely different style. And you get into this, and then you end up with like bloated code. And back on my soapbox. So don't do it. Like, stick to the standards. If you don't have it, make a standard. Particularly when you come in, one thing I want to make very clear, because this is, I think, what we run into, because we are all problem solvers. We're all smart at varying levels. And so we all have a little bit of ego and a little bit of pride and all this kind of crap. When we come into a new organization, if you're brand new, they don't owe you squat explanation. You can ask for it, but they may not give it to you because they may not even know. It may be essentially literally above your pay grade. So just be patient. Use it as just like sponge, osmosis, soak it up, work with it, try to understand it so that it's really like you want to comply. If you've been doing this for a long time and you come into an organization, same thing. They really don't owe you squat. Now, if they're going to use you, then you need to understand. And it's not that they owe you, why is it different from the way you would do it? It is you owe them to understand how they got there. And it may be that they don't know, but as best as possible, you want to try to understand why it was done this way. And if it's like nobody knows, then you can say nobody knows, but you should, as much as possible, have a good idea of like, this is what we do, and this is why we do it. And since you are a senior in this case, there may be things where you say, hey, you do it this way. I've seen it done differently. Maybe we can look at converting it over. Maybe not, because sometimes the cost of converting to that better solution is more than it's worth to, more than whatever you're going to get out of that new solution. So try, and this is, I know it's very hard for people to do it, like try to actually work with what exists when you walk into a new environment, project, ecosystem, instead of ripping it all apart. Like, we got to do it this way because this is the right way. Especially if you're one of those like big six firms that comes in, it's like, we're going to spend billions of dollars, so we're going to rip all your crap out and make it look like we want it to look. Give everybody a break and say, hey, maybe they got something right here, and try to work with what they had and carry forward with that, instead of trying to, enforce your experience in your background. You will be better for it, because if you go into this and you learn where you will, if you do this right, you will learn where your stuff, your background, your skills, your approach can actually be improved, if not all the time, but at least in certain situations. Closing thoughts?
Yeah, I've got a couple, and one I will save as a teaser for the after podcast for the video, because it's more of a lengthy discussion. But as you go through this, like Rob said, they hired you for a reason. They hired you for your skills. You have a certain skill set. To avoid a lot of the headbutting, one of the best things, I hear this constantly, is don't lose the forest through the leaves. Make sure that you understand the problem that you're working on, you understand the task that needs to be done, and you work within the structure that you are provided, the frameworks, the code styles, whatever, and that you get the job done in the simplest way possible. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't over-architect it. And 9 out of 10 times, you're not going to headbutt. You're going to get the job done faster, and your life's going to be a lot easier.
Very well said. And so rather than complicate things, we're going to wrap this one up. You can always do very uncomplicated emails and communications to us via developreneur.com. We have a contact form. You can shoot us something at info@developreneur.com. You can put comments in if you subscribe, you can get it wherever you do your podcast. You can do it on the YouTube channel, which Michael alluded to. There may be bonus material coming on, maybe not, probably will be because we just teased it a minute ago or less. And we will be back next time around. We're going to continue the podcast season. We've got plenty of things to discuss on the developer journey. So I guess you can leave that seat for right now, but make sure you come back to wherever you are so you catch us for the next episode because you really don't want to miss one. You never know what kind of cool stuff you would miss out on, and then your life will be a little less. Maybe not that bad, but close enough. That being said, go out there and have yourself a great day, a great week, and we will talk to you next time. All right, bonus time.
All right. Bonus use case. What if you are a developer coming into a shop that has had to reset their development staff? So the standards they had in place for all this existing code, no one understands it anymore. No one knows it. It's essentially a blank box, but they want you to conform to what's there.
Okay. This is where, okay, so they want you to conform what exists, but they can't tell you what exists effectively.
Right. So for instance, a situation I went through a couple of years ago where I was brought into one company only to find out that 90% of the development team left. We had one guy that knew everything, and the one guy had no coding standards. And so coming into that, I had to essentially figure out, one, what was there, how it was put together, what standards were there, and kind of put something together to kind of bring everyone together on the same page. But if you're someone who has not been through this, how would you navigate that type of situation?
I think it's the same thing. Is that it's what you do is you go with what you know, what you have. If they've got, and this is actually even if they do know what they've got, and it's just very minimalistic. Sometimes it is. They have a very immature software model of some sort. You know, they're down there basically they're slinging code and there's no standards to it. What you can do is start working towards standards. Figure out what they have, and sometimes there are standards that are unwritten because they have certain styles and coding groups and approaches that they do that it's like, oh, you guys don't realize it, but this is a style you have. These are standards that you use already. And so part of that is documenting that, making that part of things moving forward. A lot of times it's going to be stuff like implementing or talking somebody into implementing certain things like code reviews and things like that, where you start making sure that particularly an organization that is very dispersed and they're just doing their own thing is now talking a little bit and thinking about the rest of the team and not just them and their silo and whatever problem they're solving. And then like everything, I find the best way is I always refer to as like the cancerous approach, where you just like a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there. And you start growing out. You don't want to, and I've seen this where people come in and they're like, okay, we've got this big, complicated, like full thing that we learned at whatever company we were at before, and this is how we're going to do it. And there's 3 developers there and their heads explode because they say, no, it's too much. Instead, it really is a journey in that point where it's like, okay, let's start with what we've got. And I have been in a situation where it's like, okay, let's start with, we're going to have this thing called version control. And we're going to actually store our code and we're going to be able to have access to it. And we're going to have this thing called a test server. And we're not going to just go play on our production server anymore. We're going to have something where we can actually test stuff. You know, there's so many levels and items that go into mature software development that if you're not there, I think it's one of those, like, just pick one, pick something. And depending on the team and what they're doing and what the solutions are, is find something that is it's really where you start looking for the biggest bang for the buck early on and say, okay, you know, you guys don't do this. So let's fix that first. You know, like one of them may be everybody's doing hot fixes on the production server and then everything's on fire all the time because somebody typos it and it blows this up and it blows that. And then you're like, okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to shut off access to that server and we're going to have a structured promotion of code into the production environment. We're going to actually have like a release cycle or something like that. And I'm just making these things up because every organization is a little different in what they hit. But I see that as the best way is you start simple or simple based on where they're at. Because if you can start moving it in the right direction and give them some hints or some steps or something like that, sometimes it's just little as documentation and things like that, is to just get people moving in the right direction, then start chunking your way through it because you're not going to eat the elephant in one bite. You need to really work toward, and it's not only just working towards it, but it's also sometimes there are going to be things that you normally would do with an organization that you don't with this one because it doesn't fit them or there's something about them that they can't get their head around it or it doesn't really fit their model or whatever it is. It's like really there is no such thing as one size fits all. So this is where if you really are going to be a better developer and really contribute to the organization, as you look at where can this organization and these people improve and where's going to give them the biggest bang for their buck. And then, eventually you can get to smaller and smaller payoffs, but you start with the things just like, this is something that we can do, and this is going to give us value.
Exactly. And the only thing I would like to touch on to that is you laid out a whole lot of information, which is great. And if you didn't catch it all, rewind and listen to it again, because he touched on a lot of good points. But the key one is start small. The second key is remove access from things that people shouldn't have access to. 9 out of 10 times, that will fix 90% of your problems. And then the other thing that you didn't really touch on that I've experienced is get your environment stable. I've walked into some houses and found out that the production server is crashing every other hour and no one has any clue what's going on. In fact, a lot of people on the team didn't even know it was happening. Only 2 people, the manager and the senior dev, even knew it was going on. So instead of communicating the problem to the team, we were all in this silo doing work and basically the sky is falling. So if you run into those types of situations, again, start small, like Rob said, but immediately look at the pain points. What is causing the biggest problem right now? How can I eliminate that? Or how can I fix that first? Get things stable, walk into it. Documentation is key. Writing test cases if you don't have a test environment. Remove access, restrict access. Look at your data structure, and then look at policies and procedures and processes. These are all things, good things to follow wherever you go. Even if you're new, you could be in a company and shift teams, and the team that you're on was stable. Now the team you're on is not. Okay, what can you take from team A to team B? But team A and team B may also have different styles of doing things. There may not be a corporate style. It could be a team style. So figure that out as well. And the other thing is, we all get frustrated. We all have a little bit of it and ego. Take a step back if things are getting heated. Hit mute, turn your camera off, walk away for a little bit, calm down, then come back refreshed and revisit the problem.
That is excellent. And if it happens to be that we are your problem, I'm going to give you a solution right now because we're going to wrap this one up. We will be back next time around. If we're your problem, you don't have to actually come back. But I know we're not really. So test that theory out. Come see us next time around. We're going to continue going into our developer journey. As always, just like Tim from Oshkosh, feel free to shoot us a comment or a question or anything like that. We'd love to add those and address those as we go through this journey. Hope you continue yours. Have a great day and a great week. And we will talk to you next episode.